Once upon a time, in a quiet white stone town with narrow cobbled streets and old houses that leaned against each other like sleepy companions, there lived a beggar named Thomas. Every day, Thomas sat at the same corner near the fountain in the town square. His clothes were ragged, patched so many times that they seemed like a quilt of forgotten colors. His hair was tangled, and his beard grew in uneven tufts. Children often ran past him, whispering to one another, calling him the poor man of the square. People thought Thomas was nothing but a beggar, someone who had lost everything. They dropped coins into his small tin cup when they felt generous, though most walked past him without even looking. In the mornings, he would stretch out his hand and ask softly, "Spare a coin, kind soul?" In the evenings, he would lean against the cold stone wall, looking at the fountain as though it carried secrets only he could hear. But Thomas was not what he seemed. Behind his tired eyes lay a secret so large, so unbelievable, that if the townspeople knew it, they would never ignore him again. For Thomas was not just a beggar. Hidden away, far from the eyes of everyone, he carried a fortune greater than the richest man in town. Yet he never touched it. He never used it to buy warm clothes, nor food, nor even a soft bed. Instead, he lived as though he owned nothing. Why? That was the mystery no one could solve. The town square was always alive with chatter. Merchants shouted prices, women bargained for bread and cheese, children chased each other around the fountain. But amid the noise, Thomas stayed still. His silence and patience made some people uneasy. A baker once said, "That man watches too much. He has the eyes of someone who knows things." The butcher nodded but shrugged. "He's just poor." What could he know? One cold morning, a boy named Peter stopped in front of Thomas. Peter was no older than 12, with messy blonde hair and a curious mind that often got him into trouble. He stared at the beggar, tilting his head. "Why do you sit here every day?" Peter asked. "Don't you ever want to leave this place?" Thomas looked up slowly. His voice was soft but deep, carrying a weight that didn't match his shabby appearance. "A man stays where he must, boy. The world passes him by, and he learns from watching." Peter frowned. "But don't you want more? Don't you want to be free?" For a long moment, Thomas didn't answer. He only tapped the side of his tin cup with a finger. The sound echoed faintly, almost like a riddle. Then he said, "Sometimes freedom isn't in gold or fine clothes. Sometimes it's in waiting for the right moment." The boy didn't understand, but the words stuck in his mind. As days passed, Peter kept visiting Thomas. While other children laughed at the beggar, Peter sat beside him and listened. Thomas told him stories, old tales about sailors who found islands of treasure, kings who gave up their crowns, and ordinary men who discovered extraordinary truths. Peter was fascinated. To him, Thomas was not a beggar but a storyteller, someone who carried secrets inside his wrinkled hands. One afternoon, when the sun dipped low and painted the white town in shades of orange, Peter noticed something strange. Thomas was staring at a tall man in a fine black coat who had just arrived in the square. The man was sharp-faced, with eyes that darted like knives. He moved quickly, speaking to no one, and vanished down an alley. But in that brief moment, Thomas's expression changed. His tired face tightened with recognition, almost fear. "Who was that?" Peter whispered. Thomas lowered his gaze. "A shadow from the past," he murmured. "One I hoped would never find this town." Peter's heart raced. He wanted to ask more, but Thomas shook his head and would not speak again that evening. From that day, Peter noticed Thomas becoming more watchful. At night, instead of sleeping by the fountain, he slipped away into the dark streets. Peter, curious and restless, once followed him. What he saw made his eyes widen. Thomas did not go to sleep in an alley or behind a shop as beggars usually did. Instead, he walked out of the town square, across a small bridge, and into the old cemetery on the edge of town. The place was silent, the tombstones glowing pale under the moonlight. There, Thomas knelt by a certain grave, brushing away the weeds as though he had been guarding it for years. Peter crouched behind a tree, shivering. He saw Thomas reach into the earth near the gravestone and pull out a small iron key. The beggar held it for a moment, staring at it with something between sorrow and determination, before tucking it back under the soil. Then he whispered words Peter could not hear. That night, Peter went home restless, his mind filled with questions. Why did Thomas keep a key in the cemetery? What did it open? And why had he looked so fearful when he saw the man in black? The days turned colder. Winter crept into the town with frost that bit at fingers and noses. The townspeople hurried through the square wrapped in thick coats, but Thomas had only his patched rags. Still, he did not shiver. He sat as though the cold were just another companion. Then one evening, when the snow began to fall, disaster struck. A thief rushed into the square, grabbing coins from a fruit seller's stand and knocking over baskets. People screamed. The thief ran straight toward Thomas, perhaps thinking the beggar was too weak to stop him. But to everyone's shock, Thomas moved with a swiftness no one had ever seen. He stuck out his leg, tripping the thief, and in one smooth motion, grabbed him by the collar. The crowd gasped. "The beggar caught him," someone shouted. Thomas held the thief until the guards arrived. They thanked him, but the people were left staring, whispering among themselves. How had a beggar, who seemed so frail, moved like a trained soldier? That night, Peter asked Thomas directly, "You're not just a beggar, are you? Who are you really?" Thomas studied the boy's face. Snowflakes clung to his beard like tiny crystals. Finally, he said, "One day you will know, Peter. But not yet. The truth is heavy and you are still young." Peter's heart pounded. He felt the beginning of a great story unfolding, one bigger than he had ever imagined. What he didn't know was that the fortune Thomas carried hidden away for years was not just gold or jewels. It was something far greater, something that would soon change not only Thomas's life, but also the entire town. And the shadow in the black coat was coming closer with each passing day. The story was only beginning. Snow lay thick on the rooftops of the town, turning every chimney and window into a painting of white silence. The air was so cold that people walked quickly, their breath turning into little clouds that vanished in the frosty air. Yet in the square, Thomas sat as always, his thin blanket wrapped around him, his eyes sharp as he watched the people pass. The townspeople had not forgotten the night he caught the thief. Some now looked at him differently. A few even gave him warmer smiles and extra coins, as though they had suddenly discovered he was not as useless as they thought. But others whispered suspiciously. "Did you see the way he grabbed that thief?" the butcher said to the baker. "That's not the strength of a starving man." "A beggar doesn't move like that," the baker agreed. "He hides something. I tell you, he hides something." And though they didn't know it, they were right. Peter could not stop thinking about the graveyard, the hidden key, and Thomas's strange words. The boy's curiosity burned like fire in his chest. He wanted answers. But Thomas refused to explain, only telling him riddles that left Peter restless at night. Then, one evening when the moon was a thin silver line in the sky, the man in the black coat returned. He stood across the square, leaning against a lamppost, watching Thomas with eyes as sharp as knives. His face was pale, his lips thin, his nose long like a hawk's beak. He said nothing. He only watched. Thomas noticed him immediately. For a moment their eyes locked, and the square seemed to grow colder. Then Thomas turned his gaze away, pretending not to care. But Peter saw the stiffness in his shoulders, the quiet tension in his jaw. The man disappeared again into the alleyways, but Thomas knew the shadow was closing in. That night, Thomas left the square earlier than usual. He thought no one followed him, but Peter trailed behind quietly, determined to uncover the truth. The boy's heart raced as he moved from one wall to another, keeping out of sight. He followed Thomas across the bridge, past the frozen river, until they reached the cemetery. The place looked even more frightening under the moonlight. Snow rested heavily on the gravestones, and the trees stood like black skeletons against the sky. The silence was so deep that even Peter's breath felt loud. Thomas knelt at the same grave as before. He brushed the snow away with his bare hands until the stone letters appeared. "Here lies Jonathan Hale, a man of honor." Peter's eyes widened. He knew the name. Jonathan Hale had once been one of the richest men in town, years ago, before Peter was even born. People still spoke of him, sometimes how he had vanished one night, leaving his fortune behind, but no one ever found it. Some said thieves took it. Some said it sank into the sea. Others said it was cursed. Thomas reached into the soil and pulled out the iron key once more. This time he didn't put it back. He held it tightly, his hands trembling slightly. His voice, low and rough, broke the silence. "Jonathan, I kept my promise. I guarded it all these years. But the shadow has come. And soon the boy may know." Peter's heart nearly stopped. He wanted to run, but his legs would not move. His mind screamed with questions. Was Thomas talking to the dead man? What promise? What was hidden? Suddenly, a sound cracked the silence, a branch snapping underfoot. Thomas turned sharply, his eyes scanning the darkness. Peter froze, but then another shape stepped out from behind the tombstones. It was the man in the black coat. Well, well, the man said. His voice was smooth but cold. I wondered how long you would keep hiding, Thomas. Thomas's jaw tightened. You shouldn't have come here. The man laughed quietly. Oh, but I should. You've kept it long enough. The fortune doesn't belong to you. Hand me the key, and I'll spare you. Peter gasped softly. He covered his mouth, praying they hadn't heard him. Thomas rose slowly to his feet, slipping the key into his pocket. Though he wore rags, he suddenly looked tall, almost noble. His eyes blazed with a fire Peter had never seen before. You will never touch it, Thomas said firmly. It belongs to no thief, no shadow. It belongs to the right hands when the time comes. The man's smile faded. His eyes narrowed like a blade about to strike. Then you force me to take it. He moved quickly, pulling a knife from his coat. The steel glinted in the moonlight. But before he could step closer, Thomas grabbed a broken branch from the ground and held it like a staff. His movements were sharp, trained, nothing like the beggar the town believed him to be. The two men circled each other in the snow, their breaths steaming in the cold air. The cemetery seemed to hold its breath with them. Then, with sudden speed, the man lunged. The knife slashed through the air, but Thomas blocked it with the branch, the sound echoing against the stones. The fight had begun. Peter, trembling behind the tree, could hardly breathe. His mind spun with shock. The beggar he thought he knew was no beggar at all. He was a fighter, a guardian, a man protecting something far greater than anyone had ever guessed. And in his pocket lay the key to a hidden fortune that could change everything. But would Thomas survive long enough to keep it safe? The snow fell heavier, covering the ground in white silence, as the shadows of two men clashed among the graves. The secret was no longer safe. The danger had arrived. The wind howled through the cemetery, carrying flakes of snow that stung the skin. Between the crooked tombstones, the clash of wood and steel rang like a drum of danger. Thomas, the beggar of the square, no longer looked weak or tired. His back was straight, his grip firm on the broken branch. His eyes burned like a man with nothing left to lose, or perhaps everything to protect. The man in the black coat lunged again, knife gleaming, his movements sharp and precise. He was no common thief. His steps were too steady, his strikes too calculated. Whoever he was, he had been trained. You can't protect it forever, Thomas, the man hissed. You're old, weak. Give me the key and live the rest of your miserable life in peace. Thomas blocked another strike, the force shaking his arms. He gritted his teeth. You mistake me for weak. I've fought greater enemies than you, and I've kept my promise all these years. I won't break it now. The two circled, boots crunching in the snow, steam rising from their breath. From behind the tree, Peter's small body shook. His heart pounded so loudly he feared they might hear it. He wanted to scream, to run, but his legs felt trapped in ice. Yet something inside him burned a need to know, a need to understand why a beggar carried a secret worth dying for. The man in black feinted left, then struck right. The blade slashed across Thomas's arm, cutting his sleeve and leaving a thin line of red. Thomas hissed in pain but did not falter. With a roar, he swung the branch and struck the man's hand, forcing him to drop the knife into the snow. It clattered against a tombstone, the sound echoing in the frozen air. For a moment, silence. The man in black's lips curled into a bitter smile. You haven't lost your touch, Guardian. The word struck Peter's ears like a bell. Guardian. Thomas stood taller, chest heaving, his breath clouding in the night. His eyes hardened. Don't call me that. But that's what you are, the man sneered. Guardian of a dead man's treasure. Jonathan Hale's fortune, locked away for decades. You've wasted your life protecting it. And for what? To give it to some fool child one day? It belongs to me. I was promised a share before Hale died, and now I will take it all. Peter's head spun. Treasure. Jonathan Hale. Guardian. Everything he had wondered about was true. Thomas lifted the branch again. His voice was steady, though his blood dripped into the snow. You were never promised anything, Vance. Hale trusted no thief, no traitor. You betrayed him in life, and you won't rob his memory in death. The man's smile faded. His eyes darkened like storm clouds. Then you die here, old man. Vance dived for the knife in the snow, fingers brushing its handle. But before he could rise, Thomas struck with the speed of lightning. The branch cracked against Vance's temple. He cried out and fell to the ground, the knife sliding out of reach. The fight was over. Vance groaned, clutching his head, blood trickling down his cheek. His eyes rolled with fury. You won't win forever. Others will come. They'll smell the gold, the jewels. You can't protect it all. Thomas planted the branch in the snow, his chest rising and falling like waves. He looked down at Vance with quiet sorrow. If others come, I will still be here. And if I am gone, another will rise. That was the promise. Vance spat in the snow and staggered to his feet, retreating into the shadows like a wounded wolf. His figure melted into the night, leaving only silence behind. Thomas let the branch fall. His hands trembled, his shoulders heavy. Slowly, he sank to his knees by Jonathan Hale's grave. The snow covered his wounds, but he seemed not to feel them. From behind the tree, Peter finally stepped out. His small boots crunched in the snow, startling Thomas. "How long have you been there, boy?" Thomas asked without turning his head. "Long enough," Peter whispered. His voice shook. "You're not just a beggar. You're a guardian. And you're hiding Jonathan Hale's treasure." Thomas closed his eyes. His face was lined with exhaustion, but also with relief, as though a burden too heavy to carry alone had finally been seen. "Yes," he said softly. "It is true." Peter swallowed hard, his breath white in the cold. "Why? Why live like this? Why pretend to be poor when you guard a fortune?" Thomas turned then, and in his eyes was not greed, not pride, but sorrow. "Because fortune is not always a blessing, Peter. Jonathan Hale was a wealthy man, richer than kings. But wealth made him enemies men like Vance, men who would kill and destroy to have it. Before he died, he begged me to guard it, not for myself, but for the one who would use it wisely. A fortune in the wrong hands is a curse, but in the right hands, it is hope." Peter's lips parted. His heart raced. Then, who are the right hands? Thomas looked at the boy with a gaze so deep Peter felt as though the world itself had stopped. "That, Peter, is the question I have waited years to answer." The wind howled again, rattling the branches above the graves. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and the town bell tolled midnight. Thomas pressed his hand against the gravestone. "The key unlocks more than a chest of gold. It unlocks the future of this town. But it must not fall into greedy hands. Do you understand?" Peter nodded slowly, though fear and wonder twisted inside him. Thomas rose unsteadily, clutching his wounded arm. "The time is near. Vance will return, and others may come. I cannot guard it forever. Perhaps the boy who listens more than he laughs, who asks instead of mocks, who dares to see a beggar as more than rags, perhaps he is the one." Peter's heart pounded so hard it hurt. Was Thomas speaking of him? The snow fell thicker, wrapping the cemetery in silence. The hidden fortune still lay untouched, but now the truth was no longer locked away. And the weight of the guardian's promise was slowly shifting onto Peter. The following days in the town were colder than ever. Snow lay thick on the roofs, icicles hung from windows, and smoke curled lazily from chimneys. People hurried through the square, stamping their boots to stay warm. But though life looked ordinary, shadows stirred beneath the surface. Vance had not been seen since the fight in the cemetery, but Thomas knew he had not vanished. Men like Vance never gave up. They waited, they planned, and they struck when least expected. Thomas sat in his usual place by the fountain, his tin cup before him. To the townspeople, he looked the same shabby, tired, silent. But Peter, who now carried the weight of the secret, could see the difference. Behind those watchful eyes, Thomas was more alert than ever. Peter felt torn inside. He had learned more than he could ever tell anyone. If he told his parents, they wouldn't believe him. If he told the townspeople, they might turn greedy. The thought of gold and jewels would change them, perhaps even destroy them. Thomas was right, fortune was not always a blessing. But Peter also knew something else. Thomas could not guard it alone anymore. One evening, when the streets were empty and the lamps glowed faintly through the falling snow, Peter walked with Thomas back to the bridge that led toward the cemetery. The boy's breath came out in shaky puffs. "Thomas," he whispered, "you should show me. Show me the fortune. I want to understand." Thomas stopped, leaning heavily on his stick. The old man studied Peter for a long time, his eyes sharp even in the dim light. "Are you sure, boy? Once you see it, you will never be the same. The knowledge will follow you like a shadow. You will not sleep as easily. You will not laugh as freely. It is a heavy truth." Peter's small fists clenched. "I'm not afraid." A faint smile touched Thomas's lips, though his eyes remained sad. "Bravery is not the absence of fear, Peter. It is carrying fear and moving forward anyway." "Very well. Tonight you will see." They crossed the bridge, the frozen river groaning beneath its icy shell. The cemetery loomed ahead, its gates dusted white with snow. Thomas led the way with slow but steady steps, his lantern casting a circle of trembling light. At Jonathan Hale's grave, Thomas knelt once more. With his wounded arm wrapped in cloth, he dug into the soil and pulled out the iron key. The moonlight struck it, and it gleamed cold and mysterious. "This key," Thomas said softly, "opens the vault beneath Hale's old estate. Few remember, but Hale built a cellar deeper than any man's cellar. It was not for wine, but for his fortune. When enemies closed in on him, he begged me to guard it not as an owner, but as a keeper. I became the guardian." Peter's heart raced. "And the treasure is still there?" Thomas nodded. "Yes. Every coin, every jewel untouched. Because greed blinds men, and they search in the wrong places. Hale was clever, and so was I. No one has ever found it." The boy's eyes shone with wonder, but then a thought struck him. "If it is so great, why not use it? You could have lived like a king. You could have helped the town. People wouldn't suffer through winters like this." Thomas's face darkened. "Wealth draws wolves, Peter. If I had used even a coin, men like Vance would have swarmed here years ago. The town would be burned, families broken, lives lost. Sometimes the greatest kindness is restraint. Hale's fortune was meant for a time of true need, not for comfort." Peter lowered his gaze, his young mind wrestling with truths too heavy for his age. But he understood one thing. Thomas was not selfish. He was carrying a burden no one else wanted. "Then when will it be time?" Peter asked quietly. Thomas looked toward the horizon, where the town's rooftops gleamed under the moon. "When someone comes who can use it not for greed, not for pride, but for the good of all. That day is close. I can feel it." Before Peter could ask for more, a sound cut through the night. Voices. Thomas stiffened. He blew out the lantern, and darkness swallowed them. Only the pale moon lit the graves. From beyond the cemetery wall came rough laughter and the crunch of boots in snow. "They're coming," Thomas whispered. "Vance has returned, and he's not alone." Peter's heart leapt into his throat. He clung to Thomas's sleeve, eyes wide. Thomas grabbed his arm firmly. "Listen, boy. If they catch me, you must run. Do you understand? Run and keep the secret safe." "No," Peter whispered fiercely. "I won't leave you." "You must," Thomas said, his voice steady but urgent. "I swore to guard the fortune, but promises passed like torches. If I fall, you must carry it. You are the only one who has listened with a clean heart." The voices grew louder. Shapes appeared at the edge of the graveyard, dark figures, for 5, maybe more. They carried lanterns and knives, their faces hidden by scarves. Vance's voice carried above the rest. "Search everywhere. He has the key. Tonight, the fortune is ours." Peter's blood froze. He looked at Thomas, whose hand tightened around the iron key. The beggar's secret was no longer safe. The hunters had come, and the fight for the hidden fortune was about to begin. The cemetery was no longer silent. Lantern light danced between the tombstones, and the crunch of boots grew closer with every second. Vance's voice cut through the night like a blade. "Spread out. He's here somewhere. Find him. Bring me the key." Thomas stood tall despite his worn rags, the iron key glinting faintly in his hand. Peter clung to his sleeve, trembling but unwilling to leave. "Stay low, boy," Thomas whispered. "When I move, you run toward the old oak tree by the wall. Do not stop until I call you." Peter shook his head violently. "I won't leave you." Thomas knelt quickly, placing both hands on the boy's shoulders. His eyes, though tired and lined with years, shone with fire. "Peter, listen. My life is almost finished, but yours is just beginning. This secret is too heavy for one man alone. If I fall, you must carry it. You must guard the fortune until the time is right." Peter swallowed hard, tears stinging his eyes. He nodded, though his heart broke at the thought. The first of the intruders appeared through the graves. A tall man with a scar across his cheek raised his lantern high. "There," he shouted. "By the Hale grave." In an instant, the others rushed forward. Thomas stepped in front of Peter, gripping his makeshift staff, the broken branch from the earlier fight. "Stay back," he thundered. His voice was so strong that even the intruders hesitated. For the first time, they saw not a beggar but a guardian of steel. Vance emerged behind them, his face pale but twisted with fury. The wound on his temple was still fresh, but his eyes burned with greed. "Don't waste time. Take him." The men charged. Thomas moved like a storm. His branch struck one man's lantern, shattering it into sparks. He swung low, knocking another to the ground. For a moment, the cemetery became a battlefield, steel against wood, greed against loyalty. Peter crouched low, his heart hammering. He wanted to help, but fear froze his legs. Then, as one of the attackers broke past Thomas and reached for the boy, Peter did the only thing he could. He grabbed a fistful of snow and threw it straight into the man's face. The attacker stumbled back, cursing, giving Thomas enough time to strike him down. "Good lad," Thomas shouted. But the numbers were against him. 2 men grabbed his arms, forcing him to the ground. The key slipped from his hand and landed in the snow. "No!" Peter cried. He leapt forward, scooping the key before anyone else could. All eyes turned to the boy. Vance's smile spread wide. "Ah, the brat has it. Bring it to me, boy, and I'll spare you." Peter's chest heaved. He looked at the key in his small hands. He thought of the gold, the jewels, the power it could buy. For a moment, he imagined himself rich, his family never hungry again, his friends envying him, the whole town cheering his name. But then he remembered Thomas's words. "Wealth in greedy hands is a curse. Wealth in the right hands is hope." Peter lifted his chin, his voice trembling but firm. "It will never be yours." Vance's face twisted. "Then I'll take it from your corpse." He rushed forward, knife flashing. But Thomas, with a burst of strength, tore free from the men holding him. He threw himself in front of Peter, blocking the strike. The blade slashed across his side, and he fell to his knees. "Thomas!" Peter screamed. The old man's hand shot out, gripping Vance's wrist with surprising force. His eyes blazed one last time. "You will not touch him." With a roar, Thomas twisted the branch and struck Vance across the chest, sending him sprawling into the snow. The other men, seeing their leader fall, faltered. Fear crept into their eyes. Without his command, they lost their courage. One by one, they fled into the darkness, leaving Vance groaning on the ground. Thomas collapsed, his breath ragged. Peter dropped beside him, tears streaming. "No, Thomas, don't leave me." The guardian smiled faintly, his hand trembling as it reached for Peter's. "Do not cry, boy. My time was always short. But you are the future." Peter clutched the key tightly. "What do I do?" Thomas's voice was barely a whisper now. "Guard it, until the day comes when the town truly needs it. Then use it, not for yourself, but for all. Promise me." "I promise," Peter choked out. A peaceful look spread across Thomas's face. His eyes closed, and his hand went still in Peter's. The guardian of Hale's fortune was gone. The wind fell silent, as though even the night bowed in respect. Peter sat there in the snow, the iron key cold in his hand. He felt small, afraid, but also filled with something new, responsible. Thomas's words echoed in his heart. In the right hands, wealth is hope. The days that followed were heavy with grief. The townspeople found Thomas's body by the grave, and for the first time, they did not call him a beggar. They buried him with honor, never knowing the truth he carried. They spoke of his courage, how he once caught a thief, how he lived quietly yet died bravely. Only Peter knew the full story. Only Peter carried the secret of the key. Years passed. Peter grew older, wiser. He became a man respected in the town for his kindness and honesty. And when hard times struck, a great famine that threatened to starve the people, Peter knew it was time. With careful hands, he unlocked the vault beneath Hale's estate. The fortune glittered like sunlight trapped in stone. But Peter did not keep it for himself. He used it to buy food, to rebuild homes, to give work to the poor. The town flourished, not with greed, but with hope. And though no one else knew, Peter always remembered the ragged beggar who was no beggar at all, but a guardian who had trusted him with a treasure far greater than gold, the lesson that true wealth is not what you keep, but what you give. The story of Thomas, the beggar who had a hidden fortune, lived on not in whispers of gold, but in the kindness of a town that thrived because of him. And Peter, holding the promise like a torch, kept the light burning for generations to come. The end. Why don't you share your thoughts on the story in the comments section? Don't forget to like, comment, and share.